Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
I was in my bedroom, carefully examining my outfit one last time before heading out. Everything about this night felt momentous. My heart pounded as I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the light blue blouse against my chest and smoothing the front of the knee-length black skirt. My reflection looked both familiar and new. The feeling of wearing that outfit had always felt liberating, like the final piece of an internal puzzle slotting into place. Yet I'd never worn something so traditionally feminine in front of my old classmates before. Now, here I was at 28, preparing to walk into my high school reunion with more boldness than I ever had back then. I still remembered every ache of those teen years, every mocking grin, every sly comment. It started in 9th grade, when I first showed a hint of a fashion sense that deviated from the norm. I tried sporting a pair of shoes that were slightly more flashy than what other boys wore. Rumors spread, and the cafeteria tables filled with giggles whenever I walked by. At the time, my reaction had been to retreat. I'd bury my head in whatever I could, video games, school assignments, anything that let me forget how out of place I felt. I spent all of high school hiding pieces of myself because I was afraid my peers would seize every last inch of vulnerability. Even before I discovered that I enjoyed dressing differently, I'd never fit in. I was a lanky kid with braces and glasses that were never quite fashionable enough to pass muster. My hair didn't behave, so I'd keep it short and try to remain invisible. Yet invisibility couldn't protect me from jokes, from being singled out as the weird kid who spent lunch period in the library. I had a few acquaintances, but those connections were fragile. Sometimes I'd overhear them laughing about me once they thought I was out of earshot. At 15, that was heartbreaking. Of course, in any school there are different circles: popular athletes, student council leaders, theater kids, and so on. I didn't belong to any group. There was no official fashion club, but even if there had been, I doubt I would have mustered the courage to join. Instead, I took advanced English courses, burying myself in books that described lives I found more appealing than my own. When I was a junior, I experimented for the first time, wearing a subtle piece of clothing, a fitted blazer that could be mistaken as something from the women's section of the store, during a casual dress day. Some of my classmates caught on. The rest of the year turned into a waiting game for graduation, so I could finally escape the constant scrutiny. After high school, I spent years piecing together a version of myself that felt honest. College brought a new environment with more open-minded people. I developed friendships that were real and supportive. I experimented with my style. There was a brief period where I swung in the opposite direction, wearing clothes that were flamboyant on purpose, just to test my boundaries. Over time, I discovered a middle ground, a more refined style: tasteful blouses, skirts that came just below the knee, discreet heels that made me feel graceful but not overstated. My folks needed time to understand this. At first, there were a lot of tense conversations around the dinner table, especially during those visits home after the semester ended. I'd show up in what I considered a stylish outfit, only to see the worried looks on my parents' faces. They cared about me deeply, but they didn't always know what to do with the path I was taking. Once I graduated college and started working at a small marketing firm, life settled into a stride. I discovered that, outside the bubble of adolescence, people were often preoccupied with their own worries. Strangers on the subway might do a double take if I wore a pencil skirt, but I rarely faced real hostility. My day-to-day tasks involved working remotely part of the time and visiting clients in person. I built a reputation as a professional who was thorough and creative, and that mattered more to my clients than how I dressed. Gradually, my confidence grew. Yet the invitation to my 10-year high school reunion rattled me. I saw the embossed envelope on my kitchen counter and felt an odd swirl of emotions. Memories of being shoved aside in hallways, teased in gym class, ridiculed for my interests, came rushing back. Part of me wanted to tear the invitation in half and toss it in the trash. Why would I risk seeing the same people who made my teenage years so difficult? But then I found a measure of resolve surging inside me. I had grown since those days. I had spent a decade figuring out who I was, refining my sense of style, and building a more solid sense of purpose. If I skipped the reunion, it might look like I was still avoiding them. And something in me, some kernel of fierce pride, wanted to walk in with my head high, wearing exactly the outfit I chose. The weeks leading up to the event were charged with anticipation. I told my friend Lily about the invitation. Lily and I had met sophomore year of college in a marketing research course, and we bonded over our love of design and brand strategy. She had seen my ups and downs with family, relationships, and identity. Over coffee one afternoon, she listened calmly while I explained my plan to wear a skirt to the reunion. "Are you sure you want to do that?" she asked, fingers wrapped around her mocha. She wasn't discouraging me. Her voice was full of concern. "I support you no matter what, but if those people were as mean as you say, maybe you don't want to give them any ammunition to be cruel again." I shrugged. But what would it mean if I just show up in the same kind of clothes I was forced to wear back in high school? That's not me. I'm not going to hide anymore. Lily gave a small smile. "I understand. Just be prepared. If you need a backup plan or an excuse to leave early, text me, and I'll call you with some story about an emergency. That way you can slip out if things get rough." The thought gave me comfort. I'd never been a big fan of confrontation. The option to bail was a relief. Even so, I wanted to see what would happen if I faced my former classmates as the person I had become. I wanted to hold on to that. Sometimes we get a chance to close an old chapter of life in a way that feels more decisive. This reunion felt like that chance. When the evening of the event arrived, I took extra time getting ready. I chose a simple silver necklace, a piece I'd found in a local boutique that had become a lucky charm. The blouse was chiffon, with long sleeves I could roll up to the elbows. The skirt was tailored just enough to flatter my figure while remaining modest. My black heels were modest in height, low enough to keep me steady on my feet. I styled my hair neatly, trying to tame the waves that had once caused such teenage frustration. I took a deep breath when I finished and tried to see beyond the jitters swirling in my stomach. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "You got this. If it gets bad, I'll call at a moment's notice." I smiled at the screen, then grabbed my car keys. The drive to my old high school felt surreal. The town itself was a time capsule of sorts, the same local bakery on the corner, the same banners along Main Street announcing upcoming community events. The last time I'd driven here with any sense of importance was for graduation. The campus parking lot was already filling with cars. A few clusters of people stood chatting beneath the warm glow of the overhead lamps, hugging one another or shaking hands, presumably old friends reconnecting. Stepping out of my car, I quickly smoothed my skirt. My breath felt shaky, but I willed myself forward. I wasn't that scared teenager anymore, pinned down by other people's judgments. I took one step and then another, crossing the asphalt toward the gymnasium's entrance. The building looked both unchanged and strangely smaller than in my memory. When I reached the doors, I saw a sign taped to the glass. "Welcome, Class of Redwood High, 10-year reunion." A woman I vaguely remembered, possibly one of the student council members back in the day, stood behind a check-in table, handing out name tags with a bright smile. "Name?" she asked politely, turning to me. "Daniel Johnson," I said. Her eyes flicked over me for a moment. The corner of her mouth twitched in curiosity, but she kept her composure. She found my name, handed me a lanyard, and motioned me to enter. I thanked her, pinned the small tag onto my blouse, and mustered every ounce of determination to push open the door to the gym. The space inside had been decorated in the school colors, navy and white streamers, balloons, and a large banner overhead that read, "Welcome back, Redwood alumni." Tables lined the perimeter with refreshments, while the center was cleared for mingling. A small DJ booth stood in one corner, playing soft background music from the early 2010s, songs that had once been our generation's anthems. I took a few hesitant steps into the crowd. Immediately I saw a handful of faces I recognized. Some had changed so much I almost didn't recognize them. Others were nearly identical to how they'd looked at 18, maybe with a few extra lines around the eyes, or a more mature posture. Meanwhile, there I was in my blouse and skirt, feeling the waves of stares as people turned to see who had arrived. My cheeks warmed, but I refused to look away. With my pulse thudding in my ears, I focused on walking to one of the refreshment tables. Before I made it halfway there, I heard my name. "Daniel, is that you?" I turned to see a tall figure with short dark hair and an expression torn between surprise and curiosity. It was Michael, one of the guys I vaguely recalled from a few classes. We'd never been close, but he'd never joined in bullying me either. He was more or less a neutral presence in my memory. "Hi, Michael," I said quietly. He smiled, but his eyes remained wide. "Wow, it's been ages. You look different." I matched his smile, though I could feel my palms clammy against the strap of my purse. "Yeah, it's been a journey. How have you been?" He gave a polite nod and launched into a quick update about his life. He'd gone to law school, worked for a local firm. Then there was an awkward pause, and I sensed he wanted to ask about my outfit, though he hesitated. He finally cleared his throat. "So, you wear this often?" I read subtle curiosity in his tone. There was no mockery, just honest uncertainty. "Pretty regularly. It's how I feel comfortable. It's a part of who I am." He nodded again. "I see. Well, good for you." After another beat, he clapped my shoulder gently and motioned toward a group of people across the room. "I'm meeting up with some old friends, but maybe we can catch up more later." I watched him walk away, breathing a bit easier. One conversation down, dozens more to go. I made my way to the refreshment table, poured myself a small cup of punch, and scanned the room. My gaze wandered over cliques that had formed for the night. I saw the old track team, a few members of the theater club, folks from the tech crew who'd run the behind-the-scenes for school plays. And sure enough, there were also members of the old popular group, huddled in a corner, laughing among themselves. I recognized two of them easily, Marcus and James, who had once made my life miserable with their snide remarks. I felt a twinge of anxiety. I remembered all the times I'd tried to vanish in front of them, hoping they wouldn't notice me walking by. I was about to turn away and look for a quieter spot when someone else approached, a petite woman with curly hair and a warm, inquisitive expression. My mind took a second to jog through old yearbook photos. Then it clicked. Jessica, who had been in my English Lit class senior year. She offered a friendly hug, which I returned awkwardly, my cup of punch still in one hand. "Daniel, oh my gosh, you look incredible. I always knew you had a sense of style. Remember that time you wore that blazer junior year, and I told you after class that I thought it looked great on you?" She paused, eyes shining with encouragement. "I was so sad when people gave you a hard time for it. How have you been?" She talked about her life too, working in publishing, living in a nearby city, traveling occasionally. I found it refreshing that she seemed more excited about who I had become, rather than confused or judgmental. There were no pointed questions about my appearance, just a genuine interest in my current experiences. Eventually, we parted ways, promising to find each other later. As I strolled through the gym, collecting small pastries from another table, I overheard pockets of conversation. I could tell some people were whispering about me, glances, sidelong looks, the sound of my name followed by hurried murmurs. It felt uncomfortable, but also a little empowering. I was here, wearing what I wanted, and if they wanted to talk, that was on them. I made my way along the perimeter, occasionally stopping to glance at collages of old photos pinned to display boards. There was the homecoming dance from our senior year, the prom I never attended, the pictures of the class trip to an amusement park. My high school self stared back in some of those images, nervous, shy, wearing ill-fitting jeans and a t-shirt, shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink from the camera's gaze. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. Well, if it isn't Danny, looking all fancy tonight." The voice dripped with forced cordiality. I turned to see Marcus, the same smirk that haunted my high school memories plastered across his face. James hovered beside him, arms folded. My grip tightened on my purse. "Hello, Marcus." I tried not to let my voice waver. "Didn't recognize you there for a second," he said, giving me an exaggerated once-over. "It's been, 10 years? Wow. You've changed your style." James gave a short snort of laughter. "Sure have." For a moment, the tension of old resentments filled the air. I wasn't sure if they were going to say something insulting or walk away. To my surprise, Marcus cleared his throat and lowered his gaze to his shoes. "Listen, I wanted to say something. Actually, sorry. Sorry for how I treated you back then." The statement was so unexpected that I nearly dropped my cup. "Excuse me?" I said, certain I hadn't heard correctly. "I was kind of a jerk," Marcus mumbled. "High school was a messed up time for me. Doesn't excuse anything, but I know I made you feel bad, so yeah, sorry." James nodded, though he didn't say much. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rehearsed an apology, but it was stuck in his throat. In that moment, I sensed a conflicting swirl in Marcus's expression. Maybe the years had chipped away at his bravado. Maybe he'd lived enough to realize the harm he'd caused. I didn't know if I could instantly trust his words, but I could see the sincerity struggling to push through. "Thank you," I managed. "I appreciate hearing that. It was rough back then, but I'm glad you're acknowledging it." Marcus gave a stiff nod. "Yeah, just wanted to say that." Then, as if relieved to have done his duty, he stepped away. "Take care, Daniel." James lingered a second, opened his mouth like he wanted to add something, then decided against it. He gave me a small wave and followed Marcus. I stood there, stunned. At 18, I never could have imagined that moment. When I pictured my bullies, I always saw them as one-dimensional antagonists. To hear an apology, even a clumsy one, set off a strange flutter in my chest. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. I turned back to the photo display. I spotted an old friend from art class, Gavin, whose talent for drawing anime characters had once inspired me to create designs of my own. We hadn't kept in touch after graduation, but I remembered how we sometimes worked on the yearbook's illustrations together. I decided to see if I could find him in the crowd, to reconnect and share a laugh about those simpler times. I wove my way through the mingling groups. Gavin was near the bleachers, in conversation with two women I recognized from debate club. He looked almost the same, just with a beard that lent him a more mature look. The corners of his eyes crinkled with a friendly warmth when he saw me approach. "Daniel, wow!" He gave me a genuine smile. "How are you?" I was just telling them about those insane pages we used to lay out for the school magazine. We chatted, reminiscing about nights we stayed late after school finishing design tasks. Occasionally, I caught him glancing at my outfit, but it wasn't in a judgmental way. It was more like a mild interest, the way you look at a friend you haven't seen in years and notice the changes that time has wrought. He shook his head in amusement. I always knew you had an artistic streak, but this is next level, man. You look happy. That comment, so simple, made my throat tighten a bit. I realized in that moment that happy might be the best descriptor for how I felt, in spite of the anxieties swirling around me. Just being here, presenting myself as I wanted, was a statement I'd never thought I'd be able to make a decade ago. Soon, the DJ announced a quick speech from one of the reunion organizers, and the music softened. A slender man with a bright smile stood on a small platform by the stage, microphone in hand, giving a short welcome speech about reconnecting, forging new memories, and celebrating how far everyone had come since those high school days. I noticed the hush that fell over the room as people paused their conversations to listen. After the speech, the DJ turned up a set of nostalgic tracks that made the room hum with energy. A few couples ventured to the center to dance in a casual, swaying manner. I leaned against the wall, sipping a fresh cup of punch, watching people pair off or form small circles. My mind drifted to the fact that I rarely danced in high school, partly out of fear that my movements would spark ridicule. Tonight, the thought of joining them felt both thrilling and petrifying. My pulse quickened. Maybe I could manage at least one song just to say I tried. Before I could make up my mind, a familiar voice called my name from across the room. "Daniel!" It was Jessica again, motioning me over with an excited grin. "Come on, dance with us." She stood next to another former classmate, Carmen, who had been on the cheer squad. Carmen offered me an encouraging wave. "It's fun," she said over the music. "No judgment here." I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my eyes darting around to see if anyone else was looking. Then I drew a breath and stepped onto the makeshift dance floor. The music was a throwback to one of the pop hits from our graduation year. Jessica started moving her hips in time with the beat. Carmen joined in, and then there I was, trying my best not to step on anyone with my low heels. At first my body felt stiff, but their enthusiasm was contagious. Before long, I allowed myself to relax, letting the rhythm guide me. I felt the swirl of the skirt around my legs, and with each step, I felt more alive. Jessica laughed as she did a playful spin, and I mimicked her movement, hearing the quick swoosh of fabric around me. For a moment, the stares and whispers faded from my awareness. In the corner of my eye, I saw some classmates glance our way, but I focused on the freedom of moving as I wanted, letting go of the residual fear that had weighed me down. The song ended too quickly, and the next track flowed into a slower tempo. I took that as my cue to retreat to the sidelines, heart beating fast, a grin tugging at my lips. I found a spot by the punch bowl again to catch my breath. That was when James reappeared, alone this time, wearing a pensive expression. I prepared myself for some uncomfortable remark, but he surprised me. "I wanted to add to what Marcus said earlier," he began. "We were bullies back then. I was going through a rough time at home, and I latched on to the popular crowd for some kind of affirmation. Again, that's not an excuse, but I'm sorry too." I studied his face. He looked genuinely regretful. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "It means a lot that you'd say so." He nodded, then attempted a small smile. "You seem confident tonight. You've come a long way." I returned his smile, though it was laced with the aftertaste of old hurt. "Yeah, it's been a process," I answered, deliberately choosing words that wouldn't give away too much. We exchanged a few pleasantries about where we lived and what we did for work. Then James patted my shoulder lightly in a gesture that was once so foreign from him. He drifted off into the crowd, leaving me with my thoughts. From across the room, I noticed the old track team members had started a group dance. Amid them, I spotted the friendliest face from my entire teenage experience, Claire, who had been the track manager. She was the one person who had ever stuck up for me when things got tough in the hallways, yet I'd barely spoken to her outside of classes. Spontaneously, I walked over to greet her. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. "Daniel, I was hoping I'd see you." She clasped her hands, looking me up and down. "You're glowing." I felt my cheeks flush a bit. "Thanks, Claire. You look great, too." She was dressed in a fitted green dress, and her hair, once braided in high school, was now cut in a stylish bob. She introduced me to a couple of her friends from track, and we made small talk. I relished the genuine warmth she radiated. We joked about the old days, how she had smuggled me into the equipment room once so I could avoid a group of boys who'd been waiting to tease me near the cafeteria. She claimed she always recognized a gentle spirit in me back then. We soon turned our attention to the buffet, trays of finger foods, small sandwiches, fruit platters, cookies. I loaded a plate, feeling hunger finally replace the jitters in my stomach. Claire chatted about how she'd become a professional trainer at a local gym and did volunteer coaching for a girls' track team. The conversation flowed smoothly, like two acquaintances who'd lost years, but still shared a deep sense of camaraderie. Later in the evening, the DJ paused the music to initiate a round of most likely to superlatives, a playful callback to our senior year traditions. Titles like most likely to become president, most likely to go viral, and most likely to star in a reality show were read out. People cheered, clapped, and teased each other with the same humor they once used in high school, though now with a gentler edge. I didn't receive any new superlative, but I was relieved. In high school, I'd ironically been labeled most likely to invent the next great app by a few classmates, yet that had turned into a running joke more than an actual vote. I had no desire to revisit that kind of attention tonight. Time passed in a blur of conversations. My eyes occasionally roamed to the large clock by the gym doors. I realized the event was winding down. Some people had already slipped out. Others lingered, savoring their reunions with old friends. I found myself stepping outside for a brief breather, walking along the school courtyard. The cool night air brushed against my arms, and I could hear the muffled music continuing inside. I let out a slow exhale. Even though I'd been on edge, things hadn't gone nearly as badly as I'd feared. In fact, the night felt strangely healing. Yes, there were still a few stares. Some classmates avoided me entirely, perhaps too uncomfortable or unsure how to engage with me. But a handful had shown genuine kindness. A few had even apologized, something I'd never expected. And I'd proven to myself that I could be in that environment, wearing what felt right to me and not crumble under the weight of old memories. As I hovered by a bench, checking my phone to see if Lily had sent any updated messages, I heard footsteps. I turned to see Jessica approach, her curly hair shining under the courtyard lights. "Hey," she said, offering a gentle smile. "I saw you slip out. Wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm good. Just needed some air," I responded, returning the smile. "It's been quite a night." She sat down on the bench, gesturing for me to join. We chatted for a few minutes about random topics, work anecdotes, her publishing stories, a shared love of certain romance novels. Then she looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I think this might have been the bravest thing I've seen anyone do this evening." I let out a small laugh. Brave might be a bit dramatic. It was just a skirt and blouse. "It's more than that," she insisted. "We all have these memories locked inside us of who we were at 18. For a lot of folks, walking in here and being reminded of that can be terrifying. So to not only show up, but to do so in a way that challenges those old expectations, that's a statement. Good for you. She didn't use any over-the-top praise, just a straightforward kindness that seemed genuine. We heard the distant sound of the final songs echo through the courtyard. I realized the event was nearing its official close. People would likely be gathering their coats, exchanging phone numbers, or heading off to after-parties. I stood from the bench, Jessica beside me. I thought about going back inside for a final round of goodbyes. Then again, maybe I'd had enough for one night. My mind flashed briefly to Lily, who was probably waiting by her phone in case I needed that emergency escape call. I decided I didn't need it after all. I'd stayed. I'd faced the place and the people who'd once made me feel so out of place, and I'd survived, even found moments of unexpected warmth and remorse from old bullies. As Jessica and I re-entered the gym, I saw the organizers tidying up. Marcus and James were walking out the door, heads bent in conversation. I locked eyes with Marcus for a second. He gave me a nod, just a simple, quiet acknowledgement. It felt like a final page turning on those memories. A few others were hugging, promising to reconnect soon. The swirl of voices and the lingering smell of punch and baked goods created a sense of finality. I decided to slip out quietly to avoid long farewells. Jessica waved me off with a promise to find me on social media. I offered a polite goodbye to Gavin, who was still chatting with friends near the bleachers. Then I made my way to the exit, the crisp night breeze welcoming me back outside. In the parking lot, I clicked my car remote, and the headlights blinked in response. Sliding into the driver's seat, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair had lost some of its neat styling from all the dancing, and a hint of sweat glistened at my brow. But I felt strangely peaceful. My thoughts flickered back to all the times in high school I'd fantasized about who I might be in the future. I never dreamed that one day I'd return here wearing a skirt, certain of my choices. Before turning on the engine, I let the silence settle in the car for a moment. I replayed some of the evening's highlights in my mind. Michael's awkward but genuine curiosity, Jessica's supportive energy, Marcus's apology, and that dance in the center of the gym. It had all happened in one evening, like a condensed, symbolic echo of my entire teenage experience. Except this time, I didn't feel overshadowed. I pressed the ignition button, and the hum of the engine filled the silence. Driving away from the high school, I passed by the old football field. The stadium lights were off, and the bleachers looked deserted in the darkness. I remembered pep rallies, assemblies, and the humiliating moment in sophomore year when the scoreboard displayed a message poking fun at me. At the time, I'd vowed never to set foot in that stadium again. Yet tonight, I drove past it with a sense of closure, a sense that the Daniel who once hid in corners no longer had to hide. The main road out of town was the same route I'd taken on countless mornings to get to school, but it felt different now. I caught sight of the shops on Main Street, a bakery, a small bookstore, a mom-and-pop diner. My teenage self used to rush past these places without a second glance, always caught up in my own dread for the day ahead. Now, I felt a calm appreciation that I had made it through those difficult years. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I saw that it was nearly midnight. The porch light illuminated the front steps of my modest townhouse. I grabbed my purse, stepped out, and locked the car. The heels clicked softly against the concrete as I ascended to my door. Once inside, I flicked on a lamp, set down my keys, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My phone buzzed. Lily, checking in. I smiled, read her brief message. "Well, you survive?" I typed back. "More than survived. I'm home. We'll call tomorrow." Standing in the soft light of my living room, I slipped off my shoes and took a moment to reflect on how crucial this night had been for me. Not because it was some grand spectacle, no cheers, no sweeping acceptance from every person in the room, but because it felt honest. I was no longer that kid who ran from whispers and insults. I saw the stares, I felt the tension, and I stayed upright anyway. That was enough for me. The next day, I followed through on my promise to call Lily. We spoke for a good hour, me relaying all the details, Jessica's excitement, Marcus's apology, the moment on the dance floor. Lily laughed and empathized with the intense moments. She congratulated me on my strength, remarking that it sounded like a turning point in my life. I told her that, in my own way, I was starting to let the painful weight of high school rest in the past. 1 week after the reunion, I received a friend request on social media from Marcus. Seeing his name pop up on my screen jolted me with a wave of ambivalence. Part of me remembered his bullying too vividly, but another part of me recalled the sincerity of his apology. After a moment of hesitation, I accepted. He sent me a short message apologizing once again. He mentioned that he'd had time to reflect on those years, that he wanted to move forward without the regrets that had been gnawing at him. I responded politely, acknowledging that we could be civil acquaintances now. I had no desire to remain stuck in old grudges if the other person seemed genuinely remorseful. In the weeks that followed, my high school reunion became a point of reflection during my everyday life. A small part of me half expected to go back to my daily routine and feel uneasy, but to my surprise, I felt lighter. I continued showing up at my office in clothes that felt right to me. I chatted with my coworkers as usual, attended meetings with clients, and carried on with projects. If someone complimented my skirt or blouse, I thanked them. If they gave a funny look, I shrugged it off. There was no going back to hiding in corners. Occasionally, I'd message with Jessica or Gavin, exchanging laughs about shared high school memories that had bubbled up since the reunion. We posted throwback photos from that night, tagged some folks, got a handful of comments reminiscing about old times. While high school itself had never been a source of many fond memories for me, I found that connecting with these old classmates under new circumstances felt refreshing. We were all older, hopefully kinder, carrying the scars of our teens in different ways. Some scars had started to fade. Some remained as reminders of a rough past. A few months later, I received an invitation to an informal get-together organized by Gavin. He'd rented a small gallery space for a weekend event to display some of his recent artwork. He promised drinks, conversation, and a chance for a few Redwood alumni to mingle in a more relaxed setting. I decided to go, partly because I wanted to support Gavin, partly because I wanted to see if the camaraderie I'd felt at the reunion would continue. When I arrived at the small gallery, I found Gavin standing by an array of framed prints of his digital art. The scenes were vibrant and whimsical, creatures from fantasy worlds, reimagined with an adult flair. He greeted me enthusiastically. A few other familiar faces from Redwood were there, Claire, Jessica, and even James, who offered me a nod and a slight timid grin. We all chatted amiably about life since the reunion. Claire joked that we should do these mini-reunions once a year to stay connected. For the first time, there was no swirling tension in my chest. These were just people, some of whom had grown into more thoughtful adults, some of whom had recognized their past cruelty and tried to atone for it. We sipped wine, listened to soft music, and admired Gavin's art. I wore a floral skirt with a snug black top, feeling utterly at ease. Nobody gawked or whispered. It was just another evening among acquaintances. That night, driving home from the gallery, I thought about how life doesn't always wrap everything in a neat bow. Some people at the original reunion avoided me, and maybe they'll keep their distance forever. Some apologized, but I could still sense they were grappling with discomfort around me. Yet there were also people like Jessica and Gavin. former classmates I barely spoke to in high school who had re-entered my life with an open heart. I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could move forward. Back at my townhouse, I carefully hung my skirt in the closet and placed my shoes in their spot. I gazed at the row of skirts, blouses, and dresses that had come to symbolize my stride over the years. I remembered how, in high school, I stuffed any hint of such items deep in drawers or kept them away entirely for fear of repercussions. Now, they were simply my clothes, an everyday part of life. It struck me how much had changed. Not only had I learned to dress without shame, but I'd confronted some of the darkest corners of my adolescence by returning to that gymnasium. In a way, I had done what my younger self never thought possible. I walked through the main doors, head held high, wearing clothes that felt natural to me, and faced old bullies who no longer had the power to diminish me. The memory of that moment, the hush as I stepped inside, the swirl of whispers, lingered in my mind. 10 years after leaving Redwood High, I returned as a more complete version of who I truly was. It wasn't about dramatic acceptance from everyone around me or some triumphant movie ending. It was about knowing I could stand in that space, among those memories, and see how far I'd come. Some bridged the gap to build new connections, others averted their gaze. But all of that mattered less than the sense of personal triumph quietly pulsing within me. Before heading to bed that night, I opened my laptop and wrote down a few reflections in a personal journal file. I typed out how it felt to have old classmates apologize, how it felt to dance in the center of the gym wearing a skirt, how it felt to realize that some illusions of teenage life had finally melted away. I wrote about Jessica's kindness, Gavin's gallery, Claire's unwavering warmth, and the tension in Marcus's face when he said he was sorry. Documenting these details made them more real, more affirming of the progress. I ended the entry with a simple line: "I'm proud I showed up as me." A week later, I heard from Lily again, who wanted every scrap of detail from the post-reunion gatherings. She joked that it sounded like Redwood was undergoing a complete personality transplant. "Maybe you infected them with your gutsiness," she teased over the phone. "Perhaps you taught them all something about letting go of old notions." I laughed, even though her words carried a lot of truth. People do change with time, in ways big and small. Some remain stuck, while others realize the old ways they judged or lashed out at others were misguided. Sometimes all it takes is a single evening to spark reflection. We can't control how others choose to think or behave, but we can control how we show up, how we handle ourselves, how we decide to stand or retreat. Long after the official reunion ended, I found that the echoes of that night stuck with me in a positive way. A few Redwood classmates reached out on social media to say hi or ask how I'd been since high school. I recognized that for most of them, I was simply a peripheral figure in their memory, the kid who wore glasses and never really fit in. Now, they were encountering a more fully realized adult. Some were curious, others politely stayed away. Either way, it wasn't something that haunted me anymore. Thinking back to that night, I remember the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me as I stood in front of the gym doors. My heart hammered so fiercely that I wondered if everyone around me could hear it. When I finally stepped in, I felt the hush of onlookers. Now, that hush is a memory that holds no power. Instead, what stands out is Jessica inviting me to dance, Claire sharing her success in coaching, Gavin reminiscing about our artistic collaborations, and even Marcus and James expressing remorse. The negative energy that once dominated my high school experience was eclipsed by these new interactions, which felt more genuine. When I recall the reunion, I think of the swirling lights, the nostalgic songs, the sweet tang of punch, and the swirl of a black skirt around my legs. I think of crossing that gym with my chin raised. It marked a moment when I embraced vulnerability in front of people who once preyed on it. I discovered that the scariest illusions from high school held less weight when I stood firm. There was no wild applause, no grand spectacle, just the steady hum of a social event and the knowledge that I had held on to my dignity and truth. Over time, I learned more stories from the people who were once bullies. Some had been dealing with difficult family issues, while others struggled with their own insecurities. It didn't erase what they had done, but it reminded me that high school often magnifies the turmoil people carry. It reminded me that we all carry regrets and burdens, shaped by the insecurities of our youth. And sometimes it's up to each of us whether to continue carrying that weight or set it down. Looking back, I don't pretend that everything became perfect. I'm still cautious about certain interactions, and I'm sure a few classmates remain critical or baffled by how I choose to live. But that's all right. The reunion served as a personal milestone, a testament to how far I had journeyed from the teen who once ate lunch alone to the adult who can stand in a crowded gym with a measured sense of confidence. It showed me that those old ghosts of bullying and shame didn't control me anymore. In a funny way, I almost wish I could write a brief note to my younger self, though maybe I'd just give him a nod, as if to say, one day you'll see that you can wear what you want and still walk tall. I can't offer that note to the past, of course, but living in the present with authenticity is its own form of reassurance. The last I heard, Redwood High was considering a 20-year reunion, of course, a decade from now. Who knows what life will look like then? Maybe the same gym will host another round of nostalgia, with more stories, more revelations. If that day comes, I'll be there. Maybe wearing a floral print dress, or perhaps a more casual combination of jeans and a feminine top. It won't matter exactly what I choose, so long as I do it on my terms. The night of the reunion was both nerve-wracking and oddly fulfilling. Some people apologized, some people avoided me, and some, like Jessica, cheered me on. Even though I never felt perfectly at ease in that environment, I was proud of myself for showing up. In the end, I left with a calmer spirit, thankful I didn't attend as the person I'd pretended to be in high school, but as the person I truly was, no matter who else was watching.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.